Welcome to the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. My name is Natalie Nidham. I'm a nutritionist, a human potential and epigenetic coach, and I created this podcast to bring you the latest ways to take control of your health and longevity. We cover it all, from new technology to ancestral health practices, personalized interventions, and a very special interest of mine, peptides. Enjoy the show. This episode is all about ketone esters. Ketone esters, until a couple of short years ago, really were this thing that people maybe had heard about that tasted really, really bad, that cost thousands upon thousands of dollars per dose, and that were really inaccessible for most people. And these are not to be confused with ketone salts that are much more available. They're much cheaper, and they're not bad, but they act quite differently in the body. So ketone esters are, if you will, the more therapeutic form of a ketone versus a ketone salt. So it's easier to get higher levels of ketones in the bloodstream without overloading on salts, just as ketone salt, the name might imply. But anyway, that's not what this episode is about. This episode is about ketone esters, and it's about the guy who brought them to market. It's about the guy who dug deep into his very own pockets and made this happen for the greater good. And our guest today is really interesting. His name is Frank Llosa, and he has a really interesting story about how he got into ketone esters, and it had to do with having a rather notorious person in the ketone ester space is a member of his family. And that would be none other than Dr. Veach, who sadly passed away at the beginning of 2020. But Dr. Veach was a relative of his wife's, and they got to jamming about ketosis, the ketogenic diet, and ketones over a Thanksgiving dinner of all things. Anyway, the episode's less about that, more about the many, many applications that we're learning about for ketone esters, how to use them, when to use them, who can use them, and when maybe you shouldn't be using ketone esters. So Frank's, like I said, an interesting guy. He's really, people talk about being heart-centered entrepreneurs, and this guy's all heart. He loves what he does, and he really goes the extra mile for all of his customers, whether they're famous athletes or a Facebook member. I've seen him go the whole 9 yards for any of those people when they're needing some help. So I have a lot of time for him, obviously. And we spend a fair amount of time talking today. So in this episode, we go through a lot of different applications of ketones, what they can do, what we know, what we don't know. And also we'll talk a little bit about some of the research that Frank is helping to push along using ketone esters. So if you're looking to connect with Frank or to buy ketone esters for yourself, you would go to his website, which is KetoneAid.com. And on that page, there's a link to join his community, which is a Facebook community, very active community, and he's in there all the time. And if you decide you want to try ketones for yourself, Frank's given us a promo code, which is longevity, just the word, and that'll save you $20 on shipping, no matter where you are. So and more off the larger orders. If you have trouble applying the code, please reach out to me or to Frank and we'll help you out with it. But the code is longevity, and it will save you at least $20. And if you're looking to connect with me, you can find me on Facebook or on MeWe in the Biohacking Superhuman Performance groups, or you can reach out to me through my website, which is natnidham.com. And if you get value out of this episode, please remember to leave us a review. So that helps me to get, first of all, the episode out to more people. And it also helps me to get great guests for you over and over again. And finally, after leaving us a review, you can also share the episode with a friend or family member, anyone who you think could also get value from the episode. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all the comments that you leave me. I read them all. So thank you so much and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the show, Frank Llosa from KetoneAid. It is so great to finally get to sit down and talk to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, well, it's, you know what, I love these podcasts that kind of brew for a while. You meet someone, you kind of, you chat for a while, you go back and forth, and then you're like, okay, we got to have a podcast. We got to spend the time. We got to sit down and hash through this. So thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I also wanted to make sure that you had tried it enough times before we did the podcast, because that kind of changes the experience as well.
Well, totally, because I think I told you, and I don't want to talk about this too much at the beginning, but my first experience with exogenous ketones was, I guess, what is it, like 3-4 years ago, when the first exogenous ketone became available, or I don't know if I think they were one of the first anyway. And it was Prove It, which is, this MLM company, which at the time, when the first person who brought it to me, I put up my hand. I'm like, I don't do MLM. I don't do MLM. I don't do MLM. But at the time, because I was coaching people and I could really see the value in adding exogenous ketones to the mix, I kind of started to market them a little bit. And within a year, I had to bail out because the whole experience of the was just epic. And we'll talk about those ketones, but at the time, the only thing anybody ever said about ketone esters was that, I think it was Peter Attia had famously tried them out and had ended up almost like dry retching into a sink because they tasted like jet fuel. Plus they cost $1 bajillion. So, nobody outside of that kind of realm was touching ketone esters. And then a couple of years later, enter you guys. But before we get into KetoneAid specifically, let's talk about Frank. Frank, what brought you to this? Why are you doing this? Because you are so passionate about what you do. I freaking love it. So tell us a bit about you.
Well, I have to give credit to my wife's godfather. So Dr. Richard Veach, he's the one that invented.
You're related to Veach? Get out, sort of.
Yeah, if you can count that as being related. And he did pass away in early 2020, right before COVID. So that was horrible. He did pass away.
I didn't actually know that. That's sad.
Yeah. So around the kitchen table at Thanksgiving, we'd hear things about, Uncle or Dr. Veach doing things where he should have been given the gold medals of these Olympic Games and just all these things. And I didn't fully know what he was talking about. And then, one day I happened to take a deep dive on this concept called ketosis, which, initially anybody that has never heard about it, you get sucked down this huge rabbit hole. So it was like 6-hour rabbit hole. And I've almost told people to come to my site. They're like, so what does your thing do? And like, do you know what, the ketogenic diet is? And they say, no. I'm like, oh, well, go watch 6 hours of videos and then come back. Cause I maybe one day I'll have a way to kind of explain it quickly, but it just seems so bonkers that you really have to, take a deep dive. And then I was at a birthday party for my father-in-law, and Dr. Veach was there, and I was able to finally speak to him about what he was working on. And I, had just taken a deep dive on the concept. So I was actually able to speak with him on the topic a little bit, like just top 10%, but he's used to not being able to speak to anybody about.
Oh yeah. So he must've been so excited.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't really get excited. He's kind of, but he excited for him. Yes. Excited for him to be able to talk about it. And, he'd been working on this for 30 to 40 years. There's a book that actually just came out that talks about Hans Krebs and Dr. Veach and the lineage there. And he worked for Hans Krebs of the Krebs cycle.
Yeah.
He wrote the longest paper that Krebs, his name was written by Veach. And he's been working on this for 30 or 40 years.
Wait, but didn't he also write, I have a book of his, I think, that he co-wrote with another researcher on ketones. Did he not? I think
he wrote?
Yeah. Was it? I don't know.
Travis Christofferson wrote a book recently called Ketones, the Fourth Fuel. And it's more like a history book about Veach. But Veach, hasn't written any books like that.
No. Okay. Well, there was something else, or there was his research, because I came across Dr. Veach's work at the beginning. Like, you almost can't research ketones and the science behind ketones you literally cannot without coming across his name.
Unless you're on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, it's an important thing. If you're in the actual paper research, he's everywhere, and you know that he's the founding father. But if you actually go to YouTube and search for it, you'll think that other people are, inventing ketones when it's really Veach. And for that reason, I actually brought him kicking and screaming onto a Dave Asprey podcast. Like, oh, I don't want to. Even the day of, he tried to cancel. He's like, just have them go read the papers. I'm like, no, it's not like that. The world has changed. And, he's, an older guy, and he's, just have them read the papers. It speaks for itself. But then they had a great 1.5-hour podcast. I made a little cameo at the end about this, vegan keto diet that I was doing, and I was hitting 8 millimolars on a vegan keto diet without ketone esters. Just trying to understand fasting and what makes the ketones go up and down, and so that there's one great, I'm really happy that one podcast was recorded, because that's pretty much the only one. There's a couple others that I had them do that were, non-video, but it's just not nearly as good as that one. And that one is just epic. They talk about, power plants, nuclear power plants, just, they go into everything. So definitely.
Well, because ketones. So yeah. Okay. So I want to talk to you also about ketones and radiation, because I remember coming across something about that, and maybe it was in some of Dr. Veach's work. But Frank, you did not just start working when you finally met Dr. Veach. What did you do before? What's the backstory?
So he hates business people. He just didn't understand why a business person should make any money off of, what he's been working on. And he didn't trust them. And it had been decades, or at least years and years, where this should be out into the marketplace, and it wasn't. And I tried to help him raise some money by going to some venture capitalists and say, hey, we got this great idea, but hear this pitch. We have this $60 drink that people will have to drink once or twice a day that tastes almost vomit inducing to, Navy and Marines, please give us some money. And then meanwhile, they have, CBD and, whatever, hydrogenated water and all these other pitches. And they're like, no, thanks. So like the proof of concept was just not there. Even though it was secretly at that point being used in the Tour de France, and recently, 6 months ago, there was an expose about how the 2012 British Olympic team was using it.
But that doesn't make it. But it's not an illegal substance.
It's not illegal at all. Just it was more about the secretness and how they had to make the athletes sign NDAs, and even had them sign something saying that if this is found to be illegal in the future, you can't blame us or something. It was just some shadiness in the contracts. But all of that was happening, while Veach was trying to, raise money for it. And I had some successes 10 years earlier in the .com bubble. So it was more than 10 years. So I had some cash that I was actually too conservative to even put my money into the stock market. So it's just literally cash. And I just said, why am I going to all these VCs that won't understand it, won't believe it? They're just like, yeah, right. If I had all this cash, I've just been waiting for an opportunity of a lifetime. And I finally said, okay, why don't I just do it? And I got his blessing. And it was a, 1 to 2 years. The first year, I think it cost us, between $500 to $1,000 per serving to make the stuff. And Dave Asprey was even on record saying he paid $25,000 to get it synthesized for him to take just one shot of it. So it was super expensive. I only drank it a couple times. So I was like, why waste this $500 drink on me? No one's going to care that I ran faster or something. So I'd ship it to, elite athletes, and Ben Greenfield was the first one to get it. And also sent it to Greg Henderson, who was a 6-time Tour de France athlete. So I'd have all these athletes take it in exchange for, no money. It was just to be able to take this thing that the science said for the last 10 years, would be this amazing thing. And they all got on record on video talking about their experience. And then we built that up for 2 years, putting out those videos. And then we had to finally say, hey, we have to stop perfecting this. I know we haven't gotten the price down yet, but let's go ahead and pre-launch. So we did an Indiegogo sale with a target of $25,000 in sales. We ended up selling $125,000 worth, but it cost us like $250,000 to make it. So it wasn't like, oh, it's, funded by, no, every dollar we made was
funded by you.
negative $2. Yeah. Funded by me. So it took a couple of years to even be able to have that Indiegogo launch. Trying to scale this up required multiple labs. We literally have 3 or 4 labs sometimes competing with each other on each step. Like one lab is doing something and they said, oh, it's just not possible. Well, thank God we paid this other lab because they were able to figure out a way to do it and then put it all together. And then having to buy equipment for every step of the way, from bench scales. So you're making 10, 50 bottles. You've got to have one type of equipment, and then you've got to completely start over from scratch, multiple different types of equipment for the next size, which is 1,000 bottles, 10,000 bottles.
Right.
So having to move labs, and it's just, super, super hard to do. And, there's been some Fortune 500 companies that have also tried to do and make ketone esters economically, and a couple of them have failed. So it's not an easy process, even though you can go online and, there's some basic constructs, but not scaling it up is a whole other thing, and doing it in a cost-effective manner. So in the Indiegogo campaign, we ended up selling $125,000 worth, but then that made us sold out for the next 6 months because, we had enough for a month or two, but it kept on selling. So we had to turn off the shop. So it took a while for us to finally get up and going. And now, 2 to 3 years later, just a couple months ago, we finally have inventory. Like, we were shipping stuff out. Sometimes we would be sold out of material. And I know that someone bought 4 trainers in California, but somebody else really needed a trainer for, some huge race. And I had customers shipping things, excess inventory that they had to other people. And we have a Facebook group where someone said, I've got this Olympic trial, tomorrow, and it's in Chicago, or I don't know where it was. And I'd go to the Facebook group and say, who lives near this zip code? And within 40 minutes, we had someone in a car driving to that person to hand deliver them,
that's amazing,
faster than Amazon. And
I love it. Like, what a great community, right?
Yeah, we've done that 3 times. We did that in France. We did that, 2 or 3 times where we've had customers ship things. Oh, Hawaii. Someone had, really needed it instantly in Hawaii. And Hawaii, everything is an extra, week or so, even Amazon stuff. And I had 2 responses, and within 45 minutes, they had an 18-pack at their front door, and they were just like blown away. How is this possible that you got this to me?
Well, that's because ketone esters make you smarter too, and nicer. And smarter people are nicer people sometimes.
Yes, maybe that's it. And also, I had to bribe them.
That's not true, guys. By the way, I'm just making that up, just to be clear. I
had to bribe them a little bit as well. They get that 18-pack, and they get some bonuses after the fact.
For sure. Okay, so that's amazing. So let's talk. I mean, there's so many things we want to talk about. So first thing I'm going to do, though, and I cheated, guys. I was going to try the KE1, which is the ketone salt and ketone ester blend on. Well, we're not doing camera, so on recording, but I cheated. I kind of tasted it before, and I'm just going to chug a bottle now, but while Frank is going to answer my next question. But it's this, if you like sour things, which I freaking love sour, like sour is my most favorite thing. It's my downfall. This tastes, wow. It tastes like a sour peach. It's got a little bit of a bitter back end, but nothing like the KE4, which is pure ketone ester, which actually is like a sour cherry flavor. And that one is the one that people are like, oh my God, this stuff tastes awful. And I'm here to tell you guys, I must have special taste buds, or people just aren't connecting to this properly. Because to me, when you taste the KE4, it does taste rough, but there's this interesting cherry taste in the background. But as soon as you chase it with water, all you taste is sweet and sweet cherry. So it must be the effect of the ester on my taste buds, that at the end, the only ones left standing are my sweet taste buds. So
yeah, it took a while to go from, vomit inducing. I would go to some trade shows and I'd give people 1 dot on their knuckle and say, hey, can you help us flavor mask this? And this one lady grabbed her partner's soda out of her hand to try to chug it to chase the really? 1 dot of ketone ester. It was that bad. But now
you've come a long way. I mean, this, right. I'm drinking this now, and the peach one, I mean, I think it tastes amazing.
Yeah, the peach one is, it's a $5 bottle, so you're chugging the entire bottle. The KE4 is $30, but people take 1 or 2 capfuls. They actually take the cap, and that became the measuring tool by accident. Like, we didn't expect people to have any benefits at that tiny quantity. So then the equivalent is $2 to $5 worth is what people are taking on a daily basis. So this concept of having to get a mortgage on your house to buy ketone esters is just misunderstood, because most people don't take it that way. And that one, the KE4, does taste more like a ginger shot, or some people say a shot of tequila, and then they say I like tequila.
Yeah, like it's an intense taste. Like you just, and I mean, at the end of the day, for those of us in this world of whether you want to call yourself a biohacker or a health optimizer or whatever it is that you are, we take things because they're good for us or because they're leading us to a goal. As I say to my clients, everything you put in your mouth does not have to be a cordon bleu experience. Like, sometimes you just take something because it's good for you or because you want the effects. And this is one of those things. So anyway, let's not get too hung up on taste, because at the end of the day, guys, number one, if you're very sensitive to taste, the KE1 is a no-brainer. It's easy to take. The KE4, you don't need a ton. So why don't we start with trying to think of the proper fall line here, but why don't we start with the sports applications? And okay. then we've got a bunch of different things we're going to talk about, but why don't we talk about the sport application? Because that's really the first one you brought to market, right? That was the initial thrust behind the product. So why don't you talk to us about athletes, and we'll go from high performance athletes to then people like me who are going to hop on a Carol bike or do a weight workout or whatever it is we're going to do, and how we might use it. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience as well. But you start. You go first while I sip on my bottle here.
Right. So it became best known in the Tour de France because of the endurance and the long nature of that racing. But we also have many triathletes, marathon runners. It kind of goes all the way down to maybe a half mile runner. So some people think that it has to be a 20 or 30 minute event, but it can go all the way down to a half mile runner. But also other, esports, if that's considered a sport. I don't want to be offensive there, for the brain.
Well, it is for the brain. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's about understanding the different systems it's going to support, yeah. Right? So on the endurance side, it's going to support that whole fat burning process that these athletes have to be able to tap into to keep going. Right. And then on the esports side, to your point, this is like the brain is an energy pig. So,
right. And even athletes at the end of a triathlon race, at the end of the marathon, that's when the brain starts to go. So absolutely. Bringing the brain back. Some people wonder whether the benefit that they're noticing in their legs, is it really even the muscles, or is it the brain telling you that the muscles are doing better? So it can, every single
probably sport, both.
There's very few sports that I can think of. Motocross racing, boxing. Oh my God, for boxing, when they figure this out, quarterbacks. A quarterback, any football player, but a quarterback in particular, to be as sharp mentally at the end of the fourth quarter, as they are at the beginning of the first quarter. Like when they figure that out, it's just going to change everything. The end of the games are just going to be so much, more exciting.
Well, and
so every
also,
single sport except for maybe Spanish.
Are we allowed to talk? So I know there's certain topics we're allowed to talk, and other ones that are a little touchier because of where the research is and all that. But from an effect on the brain in terms of protecting brain cells, and when we're talking about boxers, MMA fighters, like these guys that are, number one, they need a sharp brain for their reflexes, for their endurance through the event, whatever the case may be. But is there published research? Isn't there something about ketones protecting neurons when they get damaged in the brain? So if for a TBI, for example, because it provides an alternative fuel source for brain cells that may be having a harder time accessing glucose.
Yeah, so that was definitely one of Dr. Veach's passions. And he actually tells a story about how he was in a meeting in a presentation with General Petraeus, and they were talking about TBI on military. And, he wrote him a letter saying, none of those pitches, scientifically have any merit. Just want to let you know, thank you for your time. And he got a letter back from Petraeus from the CIA at the time. He then switched to CIA with a love stamp on the corner, and he laughs about that. So there's a mice study on TBI where they gave mice a traumatic brain injury and gave them a ketogenic diet, and the mice that had the ketogenic diet were able to go back to baseline. And I interviewed Dr. Veach about this, and I said, well, they didn't go back completely to baseline. They must have been like 90% better. And he's like, no, baseline, like exactly as fast as they were able to walk before the injury. They were put on a ketogenic diet, and it went back. And the theory is that what happens in a traumatic brain injury in these mice is the inability for the mouse brain to use glucose as a fuel source. Right. So you have this brain energy gap. You were being fueled by 100%. Now you're being fueled by 70%. And the ketone esters bypass that blockage. It's just a different delivery mechanism to the brain that the TBI doesn't stop, and it just fuels the brain back up to 100%. So those are mice, and that was the ketogenic diet. But transitioning that into humans, most humans over the age of 30 have some level of brain energy gap, and that's a Steve Cunnane concept from his papers where he's done research on MCT, saying the larger the gap, you try and fill that gap and bring people back to baseline. So if you're already at 100% and you take the ketone ester, at least the average amount, you're not going to go to 105, 110. It's more just bringing you back to baseline. So sometimes I'll send a sample to someone that is, super healthy, health nut, influencer, and they'll take it for the brain and they feel nothing. I say, well, how do you wake up early in the morning, have energy all the way through the night? And like, oh yeah, I've got energy all the way through to 10 p.m. and I sleep 5 hours. I say, yeah, we're trying to make everyone else feel like you.
Yeah.
So, it's hard for them to then recommend it. So I say, okay, give it to 3 of your friends that aren't like you, and then go based on their experience, not based on your own. So for boxers and fighters, they have a glucose problem, and one of the things that they can do right out of the gate is lower their sugar content, their fast sugar. So really limiting blood sugar spikes. You can get a continuous glucose monitor and really see what you're eating and how that affects your blood glucose, because apparently different foods for different people will make them spike differently. So
absolutely.
Sweet potatoes don't harm you, great. Hummus doesn't harm you, great. But if you find these foods that spike you, that spike is like just a nuclear bomb going straight to your brain and just kind of blowing up. Yeah. So if you can lower your fast carbs, so not only lower your carbs, but specifically fast carbs, rice, bread, pasta, fruit. And usually I say fruit twice and then have a half an hour debate about fruit. But it's organic and locally grown. Like, it doesn't matter. It's still going to make your blood glucose rise.
You know what it is? I think that what you said earlier is the most important thing. And the fact that continuous glucose monitors are becoming readily available to people. And in Canada, we can buy them at Costco. In the States, now there's a couple of companies you can work with online that will send you glucose CGMs, as they're called. There was a study that came out of, I think it was Israel, out of the Weizmann Institute, maybe. And what they were trying to figure out is they said, look, everybody here eats hummus. Some people eat hummus, and as predicted, because it's technically high fiber, high protein, the whole 9 yards, their blood sugar stays stable even when they eat it. Other people virtually become pre-diabetic when they eat hummus. So what the hell's going on? Why is that happening? And what they figured out, make a very long story short, is they linked it back to their microbiome. And it has to do with your gut bacteria and how they break down different foods for you. So to your point, an apple for one person could actually be not a massive insulin spike. And for the next guy, they may as well be chewing on a sugarcane stick. Like, it's the same effect. So understanding your own response to different foods becomes a critical piece of the puzzle. And mitigating those glucose spikes is a huge piece of the puzzle. But having ketones on board is a little bit of to me, it almost feels like, it's almost like a little bit of I don't want to call it a cheat, but not that people should use it as a reason to ride the glucose roller coaster, as I like to call it, at all.
Cheat days.
But it can definitely mitigate some, not all, but some of those negative effects, certainly on the brain, potentially. The other thing that I've heard on ketones is that, and this is going to be an off-label, this is not what you want to be using your ketones for, but because ketones seem to have an anti-inflammatory effect because it acts on the NRF2 pathway. They have a couple of different mechanisms, some that are known, some that maybe aren't even known yet, is that for people who may have indulged a bit too much as we go into the holiday season here and everybody's in lockdown, maybe they're going to indulge a bit more. The morning after the night before, ketones seem to help to people to recover.
Well, absolutely, for recovery. And people do use it for recovery and anti-inflammatory effects. And there was one paper where they took Tour de France athletes and had them do the 16-day, multi-day Tour de France simulation. And they took massive quantities, which is not what we normally recommend. They took 3 full bottles per day. And at the end, they did a time trial. And the group with the ketone esters was able to go 15% faster. So not like some, 1 or 2%. It was, so some of them will just take it from the recovery aspect, because it's actually really, we won't go into it too much because I have a 90-minute video that kind of explains how it works. But it's really hard to take. It's not like caffeine. You just take it anytime, and who cares about the other things? It's competing with glucose. There's timing. There's whether your stomach is empty and all these different variables. But if you take it after your workout, it's super low risk. There's no, because when you take the ester during a workout or during a race for the first time, if you take it wrong, we've had people drop out of the race.
Why?
They took too much and then their blood sugar tanked.
Oh,
and they felt like it was just too much. So they didn't do the dual fuel. They didn't add the glucose. They didn't follow it. So, we don't recommend. The first few months when we really started selling this, people were just buying it just for race day. And they were just, hoarding it. And then boom, wanting to just magically use it on race day, and said, no, don't do that. Take much less and take it, the weeks leading up to your race, and then maybe or maybe not even take it on the race. Some don't even take it because they have their routine. They have, their protocol that took them 5 years to figure out. Keep that. But then they found significant benefit because they were more recovered. It's like tapering into, into the Olympics. So yeah, absolutely for recovery. And, instead of having to take 5 or 10 Advil, you can take, some ketone ester and have similar response. And one of the professional athletes, Greg Henderson, the former Tour de France athlete, when he took it the first time, he was blown away by the watts that were on the machine. And he famously was quoted as saying, watts are watts. The watt meter doesn't lie. And he was way out. And he was making fun of Team Sky for saying that they work with tiny improvements, like they have fluffy pillows and they do these marginal gains. And he's like, this was not marginal gains. Like, I blew through my numbers. But he was more impressed by the fact that the next day his heart rate variability monitor said that he had taken the day off.
That's amazing. So his recovery is off the charts.
Yeah, so the recovery, he was just like, what? I mean, if I can, instead of working out 2 to 3 or whatever, 4 times, hard times a week, I can now double that. Like, that is what's going to lead to game day, performance. Right. And so, but you do have to watch out for overtraining if it does allow you to for sure train more. There might be other side effects that you outside of the numbers that you have to watch out for. Like, I worry about a pitcher. There's this pitcher who uses it and it makes him much more recovered. I'm just worried that there might be something that the data might not be able to show, that the numbers might say that you're recovered, but then we wouldn't want some muscle.
You get an overuse injury. Yeah.
So you got to watch out for that.
Okay, so let's we could talk about, I'm sure this whole episode could be about sports and athletes, but why don't we talk to people to close off sports for now? Why don't we talk about what are the 3 best ways regular people off the street, getting the Tour de France riders, which, I started road biking this summer. I ain't no Tour de France rider. And never will be, no desire. But what would be the 3 best ways for a regular person for physical fitness, for sports application? Because we'll talk about cognitive later. But what would be the ways that people should use them for best results?
Well, they will have the best results if they use them this way. It's a little bit different. For example, fasted. If you normally do fasted rides, workouts, and you take $2 to $5 worth of the ester, whether you're keto or not, it doesn't matter. If you're doing the fasted rides, those people will notice a much bigger improvement. But if you're telling me, oh, I normally suck down 3 gel packs, and then now I'm going to do a fasted ride and try, instead of 200 calories of glucose and all the inflammation, I'm going to try 24 calories of ketone ester, you're not going to notice a performance gain. So if you already do fasted rides and you move to add the ester, that's one benefit. The next one is altitude. So if you're doing altitude training, Tour de France riders go to high altitude. That's where the oxygen utilization is so much more efficient that the improvement will be noticeable there. I figured that out 2 years after Greg Henderson did his performance. He was at altitude, so his numbers were skewed and were much more beneficial, in part because he was at altitude. We didn't realize that at the time. I was just like, this number is actually too big that I'm not going to actually talk about the number, because then people will have that expectation and get mad.
Right.
So I didn't even say what his number was. It was too good. And then hills. So hills and altitude aren't always the same thing. You can train at altitude, or you can have hills on a sea level. You can set your bicycle.
You mean running up and down and doing hill training?
And that has to do with different muscle groups. You got your fast twitch muscles that don't have any mitochondria, so that has to be fueled only by glucose.
Yeah.
But then the slower twitch muscles, the fourth muscle group that does the hills, they have significantly more mitochondria, so they can be fueled by both glucose and ketones. So that group will have much bigger gain. And there's this one guy who's called the vegan cyclist, and he contacted me. He had taken the ester, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy! I want to talk about this on my podcast." I said, "Hey, because his numbers were again, just not within the margin of error, just very big." And I said to him, "Well, let's first go over how you used it, because we want your audience to manage their expectations, because if they take it differently and don't have the same results." Turned out that he always does his rides fasted.
Yeah.
Always does a 1 mile straight up, 1 hour straight up hill ride at altitude. He happened to accidentally hit all three of the benefits. So he's blowing his numbers out. It's like, well, I'm glad we talked, because if your readers aren't doing it in those things, they're not going to have that benefit. So that was just funny that he,
an hour climb. That just sounds hideous.
Yeah.
Lord.
So he happened to hit upon everything that this works. And one thing that's kind of funny, just a small tangent, is one might even have to change the style of how you ride. So if you're on the hills, you could change your gears, so you're using one type of muscle instead of another. So if you're between gears, do you want to be pedaling faster, or do you want to be pedaling slower, as if you're on a mountain climb, because your ketones are going to work better for one than the other.
So the slower one, right?
Yeah. And
so you want to be engaging slow twitch muscles. Yeah, so this is interesting, because even I wonder if, and I don't know if you've ever looked at this or thought about it, but some people genetically have a higher percentage of slow twitch versus fast twitch muscles. And so not that you can't develop and train what you don't have as much of, but I wonder if those people that have a propensity for more slow twitch musculature in the first place would actually get a better response out of the gate from an exogenous ketone, because it's going to push them to those workouts.
I never thought about that, but absolutely. So some of the clinical trials being done on ketone esters, they've noted, the Tour de France coaches will call the researcher and say, "Oh, what do you think about this? Because it's inconclusive." And he said, "Well, have the athletes try it, because the average, what they publish is the average result, but then there's some results that are just outside the margin of error. And you might be accidentally hitting upon it, that they happen to have a certain type of muscle set. I hadn't even thought of that. Maybe I'll even mention that for the next trials, if there's a way to somehow determine well, it's an easy test.
It's a swab. It's a cheek swab. Like you can do a
type based on a cheek swab.
Well, it'll tell you what, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I could be wrong here. I'll look it up and confirm it in the show notes. I use a genomic testing panel, and it will give people kind of a score in terms of their propensity. And some people seem to, like, just genetically have more of the slow twitch and less of the fast twitch fiber. Okay. And again, it's not predictive. So it doesn't mean that just because you don't have slow twitch doesn't mean that you can't do endurance exercise. It just means that you're going to have an easier time training for different types of sports.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. So very possible.
And it's a super easy test. Like at this point, every street corner has another genomic test.
So back to the average person that might be taking it. Some of them actually might find that if their issue is that they do a hard workout and then they're just ravished after their hard workout, and then they find themselves eating more calories than their workout, and it defeats the point. For those people, they save it. They say, I don't need my workout to be whatever percentage better, or higher watts. I just want to, be able to go back to work and not have to, eat a huge amount. And they'll take it after their workout and then not eat that, 500 calorie smoothie that's at the gyms when the gyms used to be open. So they use it for recovery, but also for not having to need those extra calories. And then that has its own, set of benefits to not eat 500 calories, after your workout.
Right. Plus you get that anti-inflammatory effect again.
And Brandon Carter, one of the Keto King, he actually likes to use it after his workout. So he could use it for his workout, make his muscles bigger, but he works, has a day job. So after his hard workouts, his brain is, deplenished. So he'll actually drink it to bring his brain back up for the non-workout business day.
Yeah.
And so he likes it for the brain. Even though he's a bodybuilder, he prefers it, for his brain, afterward.
Great. Okay. So for workouts, just because we're going to segue to the brain from this conversation, but just to recap. So if you're used to working out fasted, or if you even want to start thinking about training in a fasted state, which there's a lot of benefits for, using the ketone ester pre-workout would be a really good solution. And so with the ketone ester and salt blend, you would take a bottle. You would use a whole bottle of it. Whereas with the KE4, and I mean, again, it depends on the type of athlete you are in the whole 9 yards. And then with the pure ester, you might be able to get away with 1 or 2 capfuls pre-workout.
2 capfuls, yeah. So 2 capfuls of KE4 is the same as an entire bottle of the KE1. So.
Sorry, I just spilled some on my hand.
It doesn't taste too good when you're licking it.
Not super tasty.
But if you're going to start fasted workouts, that's a whole separate thing. Your performance will go down. It's kind of
absolutely
right. So I don't want them to say suddenly they went fasted and then I took the ketone ester and then they didn't notice a difference because you didn't have a baseline. You went from, but there's benefits of anti-inflammatory, being able to do more hard workouts more frequently. Your numbers go down temporarily, but then when it comes to game day, you can bring back in all fuel sources. But there's multiple benefits for fasted rides.
And also, the other thing we'll talk about for sprints, for example, we were talking about this earlier, even though theoretically a very short, intense sprint is going to be glycolytic, so you're not going to necessarily tap into the ketone as a fuel source. The benefit of the ketones, keeping your brain alive, keeping your brain fueled, if you will improve your performance and your post-performance, just because your brain is the one that signals your muscles sometimes that they're done, right? It can be the limiting factor.
We think that it actually might impair your top speed. So if you're doing actual sprints, people have noticed that instead of being at their 100% peak, they're only able to do 98%, but then they're able to maintain that 98% all the way to the end, whereas before they start at 100% and dip down to 95, 92%.
Perfect.
So that top speed is where glucose is needed, and ketone esters lower your blood glucose number. So people aren't able to get that top speed. And back to the professional riders, they sometimes find that it doesn't work for that end of the game, end of the race sprint, because they're not able to get that top speed. So they have to change their strategy. They have to kick 5 or 10 minutes earlier, where everyone says, oh, he's kicking too early, we'll catch him. But then they can maintain that 98% longer and not be caught. And I got a text message from a coach of a Tour de France type athlete saying, oh my God, look at so-and-so, look him up. He went out early and everyone made fun of him, and he was all on KetoneAid and he was so excited.
And he crushed the competition.
And I can't talk about those. There's 2 athletes who did break a world record using ketone ester, our ketone ester, KetoneAid, but they're not sponsored. I found out about it, sometimes after the event. I say, hey, I use your stuff and we just broke a world record. It's like,
that's amazing.
Awesome.
That must make your job so fun.
Yeah. And I said, we don't sponsor athletes. We help athletes get sponsored. So by helping them, break world records and get first place, then they can hold the Red Bull and drink water out of the Red Bull can.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to what you said earlier and let's move into the benefits for cognitive performance. So you were talking about your one client or KetoneAid user who is a bodybuilder who has an intense day job. So he'll use his ketone esters post-workout so that he knows that his brain is now going to perform at a very high level in the day job. So let's talk about the benefits for cognitive performance, like how it can basically, and I do find this, just lights up your brain. You just go and go and go.
Yeah. So this also comes down to the quantity. Most people will take $2 to $5 worth, and they'll notice if their stomach is empty, they'll notice a cognitive improvement. And some people even report creativity coming out of nowhere, like they're doing logo design and somehow this idea came up. They're like, well, I normally don't have that idea. It's almost as if it's fueling different parts of the brain. We haven't proven any of that stuff, but some people will sip on the ketone ester every couple hours. Some stock traders that are using, super high intensity, number crunching, the stock traders will love it so that they can, some of them use it to not have to be on stimulants, illegal stimulants.
That's a good one.
Ketone ester. But just,
feel good about that.
Some people will take it twice a day. So my cousin is a CEO of a company, and I talked to him about ketone esters a few years ago, and he said, his mind is always sharp, no problem. I said, okay, well then maybe the ester isn't for you, because it's about bringing you to your 100%. It doesn't really overclock you unless you take a lot, and then sometimes then it gets really expensive. But he had a problem that I found out later, that he would drink coffee in the morning, then that's it, and then lunchtime he would be ravished. He'd eat a huge lunch, and then he would have this blood glucose spike and crash, and he'd be lethargic. He couldn't book any appointments in the afternoon. So all of his appointments had to be in the morning because he wasn't sharp in the afternoon. I said, well, you didn't tell me that. So I told him, he took KE1. He took 1/3 of a $5 bottle, 1/3 of it at noon, and 1/3 of it every couple hours. So then he would skip his entire lunch, take him to dinner without being ravished. And then now he could book his appointments all the way through. So his mind didn't falter. And because of the meal that makes you crash, he didn't have that crash. So then he just doubled his productivity. So there's so many different ways to use it.
Yeah. Well, I've often recommended ketones to people at that 3 o'clock,
sundown
3 o'clock crash, saying, just trust me on this. Leave the muffin aside, push the coffee away, have a decaf if you need to, but have ketones instead. And it's amazing how people feel so much better.
Yeah. You mentioned caffeine.
So let's talk about caffeine a little bit, because ketones do augment, if you will, the effect of caffeine. Like there's a synergistic thing there. And so for someone like me, who's a slow caffeine metabolizer, it'll literally make my teeth chatter. If I have ketones and caffeine together, like I don't consume caffeine to begin with, but if I have ketones with caffeine, I'm like hanging off the ceiling.
And some people that say, oh, I don't feel caffeine anymore. They take the ester and then they looked up at me in 10 minutes and they go, oh my God, this ketone is amazing. I said, no, that wasn't the ketones. That was the coffee that you thought didn't affect you. It got delivered to the brain. So it increases the delivery of caffeine, which can be a bad thing if you normally only want to take 1 cup of coffee because 2 gives you jitters. Well, if you take 1 cup and ketone ester, it'll give you the jitters like 2 cups. So you might want to lower your coffee consumption. I wouldn't go to 0, because this one lady said, I didn't notice anything. And I said, well, what did you change? Oh, well, I didn't take my coffee that I always take. Well, what happens when you don't take coffee? I'm jittery. I've got, not jittery. I've got brain fog. I'm irritable, all these side effects of not having coffee. And she swapped in ketone ester and she felt none of those side effects, but she just felt normal. So she swapped out her caffeine for ketone ester and felt quote unquote nothing, but didn't realize that nothing was actually a good thing, because now she can wean off of the caffeine, which has the other problems on sleeping and all that other stuff. So some people have actually used it to try to kick their caffeine addiction, but just be aware that you might feel quote unquote nothing because you're comparing a stimulant to,
Well, it's bringing you back to baseline, right? So I think, and we were talking about this before as well. I think what's important to say here is that, and we can go back to genetics again. People are slow caffeine metabolizers like me, so we don't get good benefit from caffeine. It makes us jittery. It can drive up blood pressure in the long term. We don't get the nootropic effects. We don't get the athletic performance enhancements. But for people who are fast caffeine metabolizers, so these are people that caffeine, it literally like turns a light on in their brain. They feel better. They perform better. Their workouts are better. For that person, having the ketone with the caffeine is going to be like a turbo fuel engine.
And some people have taken as little as 1 or 2 mLs. Like like a dropper of the KE4. One lady on the message board is like, where can I get a dropper to put in the, and I think that's because of the caffeine effect that they're able to use with a tiny amount of ester. And I think they're not even getting the ketone effect. They're just multiplying that caffeine. Yeah. They're using a dropper, like 50 cents to $1 worth of ketone ester, and they're feeling it. Now, I don't recommend that. And that's
no.
Don't have the expectation that 50 cents worth is going to do much, but for some people, they take tiny amounts.
Well, I think for this, like so many other things, but definitely for the ketone esters, finding your way and figuring out your sweet spot it's a process. It's like, I'm coming to the conclusion that anything good, there's not a defined formula. Like everybody needs to take, it's like when you take a medication, 100 milligrams every 4 hours is what you need to take. With something like a ketone ester, because there's such bio-individuality in how your body's going to use it. And maybe your body hasn't seen a ketone since the day you were born. And so it's almost like that machinery that's still there, it has to get ramped up again. And so you have to go through this phase where your body relearns how to use the ketones.
Well, kind of. So most people will feel it on the first time, but there is a theory to having to take it 2 or 3 times because of this thing called MCT, not MCT oil, but these transporters that transport the ketones out of your system. If you don't have the transporters, it's possible that it might take 2 or 3 times, but this is not one of those things you have to take for 30 days, scratch your head, CoQ10 pills. You take them for 30 days, scratch your head and wonder, what all variables you've changed in the last 30 days. No, this is something that I've told people to stop using it. I said, what, you've used it for 4 weeks and you're not noticing a benefit? Like, you're done. Like, okay, it didn't work for you. I'll give you your money back. Or let's change the protocol. Let's take double or let's take half, but don't just do the same thing for a couple of weeks because,
and in cases like that, sometimes I see this in my clients as well, is you'll tell someone to stop and all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, now I feel like crap. And they start, because we forget, right? Like you forget what you used to feel like.
I hope Brandon doesn't mind me calling him out on this, but he had this amazing month where his numbers were just shattering his previous numbers. I think a 50% increase. And he was just attributing it all to him. And then he ran out of ketone ester and his numbers slipped. He's like, what is the difference here? And it's like, oh my God, it was the ketones. Yeah. But yes, you do attribute it to yourself. And I've explained this before. If someone has an unusual good day every 2 weeks, but if you happen to have ketone ester and it happens to be that type of good day, you just attribute it to, okay, this is my regular once every 2 week good day. But then the idea is you accidentally happen to have that every day. And then you're just like, okay, well, this is not normal to have these multiple days that are good. So yeah, he ended up ordering more right away when he saw that it was actually financially in his best interest. Ketone esters as an investment, saved him money by helping his performance. Yeah.
Amazing. So we've talked about how ketone esters may help with inflammation. Well, do help with inflammation. Ketone esters help your body because of the whole, because of when we see people doing better at high altitude training or on hill training, what the ester is doing, what the ketones really are doing at that point is they're helping your body. I think one way to describe it is almost to do more with less oxygen. So basically your body's able to perform better in a lower oxygen state. And so you had a hand in a really interesting paper that was brought to my attention a couple of months ago by one of the doctors who was involved in this research, and that was Dr. Seeds, who I was talking to about peptides. But he said to me, hey, Nat, you should see this paper that just came out that I contributed to about using ketone esters to support patients who have the evil COVID-19. And unbeknownst to me at the time, because the paper was so long, I think it's 20 pages or something. It's huge. So it was so long that I don't think I ever got to the very bottom of it. So I didn't notice a very interesting name down there. And that name is yours, Frank Llosa. And so Frank had a real hand in initiating this study. And this is why I think you're so unique in who you are, what you do, and how you do it in your background, that you're so freaking passionate about this stuff, is that you're like running around trying to like light a fire up all these scientists' butts going, we need a clinical study on this. We need a clinical study on that. And you actually were successful in getting a clinical study done on COVID-19 patients and ketone esters and how it helped.
It's not done. So we got the paper done, and I can tell the story about that. So,
okay, talk to us. Tell me.
Either February or early March, the stuff started to come out, and there was a paper from 6 months earlier on mice showing that a ketogenic diet with mice, helped them with just the general flu. And I started asking some researchers, hey, is it possible that ketones, exogenous ketones, could help, with this disease? And initially the pushback was no, it's not possible. And then I'd find another paper on ketogenic diet for ICU patients being able to get off the ventilator. Say, well, look at this paper. Well, if you add this and you add this, and I was getting 10 to 15 scientists interested in it, starting to take the deep dive. And after I think a month of bugging them, sometimes twice a week, saying, well, what about this and this, and putting all the pieces together. And New York Times came out with a paper that came out with the story of, here are 70 different products that are being considered, early on, alternative uses for different things, such as metformin. And then it gave the mechanisms for how each one of these systems would work to help with, COVID-19. And Bill Curtis, who's written several papers for and with Dr. Veach, he finally, went through that 70 list and said, oh, wait a second, exogenous ketones do this, they do this, they do this. Started going down that list of like what all these other potential treatments could do. And then he kind of put it together and said, okay, maybe. And then maybe is enough to write out exactly, the theories of why it would work, the mechanisms of, what would it do for inflammation, for oxygen, for, and they, this paper was 30 pages long, and it was actually, I think 30 pages long. I think 220 citations, and each one of those citations, Bill Curtis read in depth. It's not just pulling a line. It's like he was reading, and he has Parkinson's. So just, he's amazing.
He has Parkinson's now.
Yeah, he has Parkinson's. He had Parkinson's for 15 to 18 years.
Wow.
And for him to read all those papers, and with Bradshaw was his partner on that, and Dr. Seeds was just amazing. The amount of information that he knew without ketones being his main core competency was just mind-blowing, that you can know that much about this field when it's not even your main field.
Well, you know what it is about Dr. Seeds? One thing I'll say is that for him, he always takes it back to the cellular function and to redox pathways. And I think that when you start at that, everything comes from that.
Yeah.
Like every system, it's all about this system, right? So that ultimately, it gives him so much depth in almost every topic you can throw his way, because he always brings it back to this basic.
Yeah, he's amazing. So they wrote the 30-page paper, and now we're just working on getting clinical trials. One was approved in Denmark, focusing on heart. They had previously done a study on heart failure. They'd given racemic ketone salts via IV, so intravenously, the racemic salts, and it helped the heart. So then they said, wait a second, the COVID patients are having the same heart conditions as this study. So why don't we try something oral, so ketone ester, and see if that helps improve the heart. They're not going after treatment of the disease itself, just the, making you stronger. Let's see what it does for the heart. And that's been approved. They're just now waiting to line up patients and do a double crossover placebo controlled trial. And then we're working on, other trials to try to see if it's potentially efficacious. But in the meantime, what I talk about is sugar. Is that, the easy thing that you can do is, there's one paper that Jimmy Moore, laid out for me. I must have missed it, but the paper showed that high blood glucose levels were correlated with worse outcomes in COVID. Sure. And that the blood glucose is what's stopping the body from fighting, the high blood glucose is what's stopping the body from fighting the viral disease. And it's just like, so obvious, and no one's talking about it. Stop eating sugar. If you have an ailment out there, I don't think that can get censored. Just stop eating junk food. Stop eating sugar.
Well, and it's why we're seeing people with metabolic syndrome, with type 2 diabetes, all these people having worse outcomes.
It attacks them exponentially. So, the first line of attack is the obvious, which is lower your fast carb consumption, lower your sugar, your sodas, rice, bread, pasta, all those things, and the fruit multiple times. Try that for 2 days. I mean, I've gone on some of these long COVID groups, or
You mean the long haulers?
What's that?
Long haulers, you mean?
Yeah, long haulers. Yeah. They've got different nicknames for them, and they're complaining, I've tried every diet, I've tried this, but the only diet that they haven't tried is lowering their sugar. And if you do a search for the word sugar or ketogenic, and you'll find the 5 people that did that, and they say, oh, I found a massive improvement just by lowering my sugar content. But no one, that just doesn't raise, with all these other suggestions, vitamin D, which is all fine. There's so much noise out there that they're missing the point, which is cut your sugar, and you'll notice a significant improvement in 3 days. 2 days.
Well, the only caveat to that, and this is one way I also will use ketones in my practice now with my clients, is that you take someone off a high sugar diet and cut their sugars overnight, they're going to feel like garbage. But here's
I was going to warn you that I'm like, do I want to warn that? Yeah. So
but if you use a ketone ester, this is where the ketones can shine, because you were talking about the energy gap earlier.
Right.
The transition can be really rough as the body's flipping from sugar to ketones, and it's not making its own ketones yet. If you exogenously give ketones, I've seen this kind of, it helps. Well,
yes. So with those people that have COVID, I actually don't suggest that they go into a ketogenic diet.
It's too much.
And yes, people will have sugar withdrawal symptoms, just like they would have caffeine withdrawal. So yeah, there might be a little bit of that, but I think that their brain fog is so bad that when they stop that blood glucose, I've seen 3 or 4 people report that, hey, 3 days later, my breathing, like I didn't have this rasping breathing. I said, well, did you change your diet like we discussed? Because she was fighting me on like, oh, well, I just have one soda a day, and the fruit is all organic, locally, this and that. And 3 days later, she's like, yeah, well, my family had pasta last night, but instead I had eggs. Normally I do cereal, but I skipped that for something else. She just listed 4 little things that she changed, and her breathing was better. Now, was she already on a trajectory to be improved within 3 or 4 days? Maybe, but she was, very happy with, that free advice to stop eating sugar. So it's all very exciting. The government doesn't talk about, eating and what you're eating. They're all focused on drugs and not about, and Mike Mutzel talks about it a lot on his Instagram, where the government's trying to do all these things to us. And he's just like, how about having a program for better eating? How about, changing the root problem for all of this? And, he gets a lot of pushback, and he gets, potentially censored for saying simply, let's question how we eat.
And I will say that I'm busier this year than I've ever been before. There's definitely a portion of the population that can afford, and this is where it's difficult, right? Because the people who get hit the worst with this disease, with this virus right now, are people who have the least resources at their disposal. It's harder for them to make those changes. They don't necessarily have the information, and it may be, and I think there have been articles in the media about this, there's a segment of the population that's getting hit way harder than the rest. And it's heartbreaking, because to your point, we don't have a system that's even open to opening the discussion to them, saying, and trying to support them and help them in making these positive changes so that they could weather the storm a bit better. But
in the UK, I think in the UK, they did have a program, about actually touching upon, let's look at the food. But why is it hitting the diabetics so much worse than everyone else? The diabetics have what? They have a glucose impairment problem. They can't utilize glucose properly, so they can't properly try to fight the virus like the kids can. The kids can easily fight the virus because they don't have a glucose problem, but the diabetics do. So it's really sad that everyone's putting billions of dollars of research, in the wrong areas.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Well, you know what? Hopefully we'll have touched a few more people through this conversation. Every conversation that gets out there hopefully touches a few more people that's open to the idea, and we can shift more people's thinking. So I want to touch on a couple more things before we finish. We broke through our 1 hour limit, so we're going to keep going now. Hopefully, guys, you're still with us. Yes, Frank did warn me at the beginning. He said, look, dude, we're going to talk about this for a long time. Let's move on to another hot topic, and that's sleep. Because I tested the ketones in a couple of different scenarios. One was pre-fasted workout, which I would say I definitely felt it more on my, to your point, on my longer workouts, and not necessarily, and I ride a Carol bike. So my Carol bike tells me exactly what my watts are. So I was disappointed not to see, like the first time I used it on a fasted workout, my watts were off the charts the first time out. And then after that, I haven't been able to hit that max again since, just so you know. But what I have noticed is on the ones that require more endurance from me, exactly what you said, which is that I don't dip as low by the end of the ride. But
you don't want to placebo into it. You don't want to, people will placebo into it. They'll go too fast at the beginning when they take measures, they expect, and then they crash. So no, don't do that. Wait for the end to not have that dip.
Exactly. But the other context I've tried them in is sleep. So I started with a full capful before sleep, and you touch base with me the next day and you're like, so how were your dreams? I'm like, how did you know? Like, I had these crazy dreams. He goes, yeah, that was too much. Take just half a capful. So I took half. My sleep stats the next day, like all of us people doing these podcasts these days, I wear an Oura ring. And now, as of 2 days ago, I now have a new BioStrap that I'm comparing to my Oura ring. So now I've got two different measurements going on. And I've noticed that my sleep metrics are really good. Last night, what was interesting is that I think it was probably close to a capful, but not quite, of the K4. But I did a lot of things wrong before bed last night. I didn't wear my blue blockers. Like, it was just a weird night. I had the worst time falling asleep, which never happens to me. And it's not the ketones, because I've had ketones before bed and never had that problem. It might have been
actually. For me, if I take too much, I'm like, okay, now I really need a good sleep, and I'll not follow my own advice, and I'll increase the ester. And then, dang, it triggers the mental racing. It can trigger the mental racing.
Yeah, I think for me, it was more not wearing. I mean, I always wear my blue blockers before bed, and I wasn't wearing them last night. And I know that messes me up. Anyway, I had the worst time falling asleep. And so, but when I woke up this morning, I was like, I feel okay, but I had the most miserable time falling asleep. I look at both my metrics, my Oura and my, and my BioStrap. My heart rate variability was like off the charts. My deep sleep, amazing. My REM sleep, amazing. I didn't get as much sleep as usual. And I mean, again, I would have to repeat this experiment a number of times to know for sure that it was the ketone ester. But, it's a bit of a coincidence that I had that ketone ester before bed. And it seemed in this case to maybe have played a role in mitigating the downsides of what I did wrong and still allowing me to get reasonable recovery and sleep. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we don't know why it works, and it worked by accident. Travis Christofferson, who wrote the book Tripping Over the Truth and the Ketones, the Fourth Fuel, about Dr. Veach, he just one day said to me, hey, I took 15 mLs, which we don't recommend. And oh my God, I slept like a baby. I said, what are you doing? Like, you're taking this thing that's supposed to be an energy source before bed. Like, it's just not logical. And he's like, no, you gotta try it. And sure enough, now if you go to Amazon reviews, they're all real legitimate reviews, no people that are related to me. And 50% of them talk about sleep. And what we found was you can take very tiny amounts, as little as $1 worth. So if money's an object and that's the only way you're going to take it, the most effective, cost-effective way is immediately before bed. And we don't know why it works. There's some theory that maybe it helps the melatonin that's naturally in your system, or just helps your body be more repaired at the cellular level, like you're saying with Dr. Seeds. But people are reporting and sending in their screenshots of their Oura rings saying, hey, this is my entire week deep sleep, and then here's me taking the ester, and they just see like this huge pop.
Well, I have a theory, and I think it's probably not unique. I'm sure other people have thought of this, but the brain uses energy at night. Right. You need, and this is why some people who have a real sugar problem wake up in the night because their blood sugar drops and it sounds the alarm in the brain. The brain's like, we're going to die. We need more fuel. Your brain is busy at night, right? It's clearing out the waste. It's doing all this work. If it doesn't have a ready source of fuel, it's not going to be able to do what it does. And the ketone might, because to your point, it's not a stimulant, it's a fuel source. It's very different, right? Yeah. And so if it's providing a fuel source to the brain so that the brain can do what it needs to do during the night without having a stimulant effect, it kind of makes sense that people's sleep would be better.
And we think it might trigger some endogenous production, because mathematically, if you're taking that
melatonin
amount,
yeah.
No,
of ketones.
Of endogenous production of ketones, because mathematically the amount that you're taking is, the number of calories would be burned up in 30 minutes of you doing a math problem.
Right.
So it's got to be something else beyond that. And we don't know what that is, but that's my favorite way of taking it, is immediately before bed. And my wife used to wake up as a 3-headed monster in the morning, and the kids would always have to tiptoe around her and wake me up first, because don't wake up mommy, because she'd wake up 3 times in the middle of the night, and then without me even knowing, she took it for like a week, and she was like, "Oh, I'll get up and I'll get the baby." I'm like, "What are you doing?" And
who are you, and what have you done with my wife?
And then she told me that she was taking the esters, and it drastically changed her sleep. But people that wake up, like you're saying, at 2 or 3 a.m. with that cortisol spike, for some people, this just wipes that out. They just don't have that wake up, and then they can stay asleep. And one person reported that they had something on their chest. I don't know if it was a cell phone or a ball, and they woke up the next morning and the ball was still on their chest. They didn't move all night long. And the Tour de France athletes, they will take huge quantities. They'll take an entire bottle worth, which I wouldn't recommend, because I think it would give you a second wind. But if you're so crushed, 7 hours of just, multiple days, and you could drink 5 cups of coffee and still fall asleep, then yes, then this larger amount will bring you back to baseline. And I've also had nights where I'm going out of town with the family, and it's a 7 a.m. flight, so I've got to wake up at 5 a.m., but then I've got to get work done because I'm going to be gone for a week, and I end up going to sleep at 2, so I only get 3 hours of sleep. I take a larger quantity then. I wake up 3 or 4 hours later, and I'm like, no big deal. And the wife's like, "How are you functioning with 3 hours of sleep?" And I just felt like normal. Now it does catch up to you. I was
going to say, you don't want to do that. You don't want to abuse that superpower.
That caught up to me, but that morning, that even that day, I wasn't sluggish like a normal 3 hour event.
That would destroy you normally.
Brings you back to normal.
Okay, great. Well, so the last thing I'm going to say before we wrap it up a little bit, because I want to finish off with a little summary of all the different people and uses we can think about for ketone esters, is ketones and radiation. So I read about this. I wonder if Dr. Veach, because I read so much of his stuff way back, I wonder if he had written something about this, how ketones may help to mitigate, doesn't protect, doesn't wipe out, but may help to mitigate the effects of radiation on the system. And
I can talk to that.
Yeah, because just all the people talking about EMFs and all this stuff, is it possible that having ketones on board might help our bodies just be better off?
Right. So he did talk about it a little bit in the Dave Asprey podcast, about how everyone near these nuclear power plants should be using it, and they should have a stockpile in the case of an event. And it is touched upon in that COVID paper that the cytokine storm is similar to nuclear radiation. It's actually a similar mechanism. And they touch upon a study that hasn't been published yet, a mouse study, where they gave mice a certain amount of radiation where 70% of the mice died. And then they gave the same radiation to 3 groups of mice and gave them ketone ester at different times. And between 90 and 100% of the mice survived when they had ketone ester. So we're not talking about, antioxidants, blueberries, like we're talking about like an entire train full of blueberries, that effect. So going from 70% death to 90 to 100% survival rate. So, absolutely, it has some potential to really mitigate that. And Dr. Mercola talks about how he only takes it for airplane rides. Yeah. And he thinks that it should be He thinks every pilot should take it, and he thinks it should only be marketed as an airplane drink, that every passenger before they get on long flights has to take it. And to that effect, if you want to have less jet lag, don't eat on your flight.
Yes.
It's a great time to practice intermittent fasting. Don't eat on your flight. That blood glucose spike, when that blood glucose spikes, the radiation just has more of an effect on you. Mm-hmm. So people do take it, and they have used it for long 12, 15, they've used ketone esters for long 12, 15-hour flights that normally they're just wiped out for a day. And they take the ketone ester and they got off the plane and they wanted to go on a 5 mile run, just a quick run after getting back, because they didn't have any jet lag. Yeah. So there's a lot of potential research that needs to go into, proving the effects with radiation in humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I was back in my ketone days, trying to talk to flight attendants, because I would drink ketones while I was on the plane, trying to talk to flight attendants, like, you need to be using this, like this would be, and besides, like, again, like for these people who are working long hours, they're on their feet, they have to keep their wits about them. There's so many benefits to it. So anyway, now I think we're going to wrap, but let's do a very quick recap. And I just want to say that I would encourage everyone to give it a try. Like, it may or may not work for you. Like, we never know. I think if there's one thing you've said here, Frank, today over and over again, is how the ketones seem to affect different people differently. People have to be willing to experiment and try different things, but there's definitely so many different applications for this stuff. So whether you're a student who's like studying like mad, going into exam seasons, trying to survive, 2 short hours, not enough hours in the day, getting so much done, and you need to keep your brain on. So whether you're a student or a CEO or a mom who's trying to, who's homeschooling her kids, all of a sudden you now have a whole new career you never planned to have, and trying to get everything done at the same time. For brain and cognitive benefits, it's massive. For physical health, again, like whether it's for workouts or mitigating blood sugar spikes or trying to get off the sugar or, that kind of stuff, there's huge applications there. Obviously, pro athletes, well, they're on the train leading the charge here, thanks to you. If you get a flu, whether it's COVID-19 or not COVID-19, those ketone esters may help your body to weather the storm that much better. We don't know for sure, but I mean, we can't make any claims, but anecdotally, I've definitely heard from people who've been ill and who felt that taking esters seemed to help them in some way. Didn't cure them, but.
One topic we didn't talk about, maybe we can touch upon real quickly, is weight loss. They think of. I
can't believe we didn't talk about that. That's what everybody yammers about.
Number one, think of it as weight loss. And we don't market it as weight loss. We don't even market it telling people that are entering the ketogenic diet the first time. I say, don't use ketone esters. And they're like, well, why not? It will do this. It will do this. All these theories say, you'll do the ketogenic diet incorrectly. And who are you going to blame? You're going to blame me. And the few times that I started going down that path, and I was, that whole 6-hour deep dive of really understanding it, and they would do it wrong. They wouldn't get the right salt intake, and then they get the brain fog. And so then we just say, no, unless you're with a professional that's walking you through it, then sure. But like by yourself, like, I don't want to be part of that. And this, people will use it wrong. I get these initial messages saying, oh, well, I ate pasta last night and I ate this junk, and then I had the ketone esters, and then I woke up in the morning and I weighed 2 pounds more. What's up with that? And it's like, it doesn't work that way. And people think that it helps them overcome their cheat days. And some companies even market it that way. They say, you can have your cheat days, and then, you take this drink to bring you back into ketosis. It's not really into ketosis. There's 2 definitions for ketosis. One is ketones in your blood. So it would qualify for that. You're drinking a drink, there's ketones in your blood. But you're not thinking ketones in your blood when you're saying the word ketosis. You're thinking fat burning. You want the body to be burning fat to make your own ketones. Well, when you drink the drink, it doesn't make your body burn fat. You're not sitting there on the couch doing nothing, drinking a drink, having ketones go to your blood. it bypasses the step of your body burning fat. But people think that they drink the drink and that they're burning fat. And there's this fake Shark Tank product that Shark Tank actually had to do a 5-minute segment on, saying, don't buy these keto pills that claim that they were on Shark Tank, that every Shark Tank person invested. It's complete lie, complete false. And they show these videos of Dr. Oz and a fat blob and pouring the ketone salt on the fat and dissolves it. So all this misinformation, the ketones don't work that way. It doesn't. If you think that's going to make this cheat day go away, what is that going to encourage?
Yeah.
More cheat days. Like literally, people are going to, instead of having one cheat day a month or 2 months,
they'll do it every day. Yeah.
Every other day or in and out. There's 5-day cyclical, just all that stuff. And no, do the diet, do it well. I don't even believe in MCT oil for the ketogenic diet or even any pills or supplements, but really understanding the diet. So it's not a diet and it's a lifestyle, doing the keto lifestyle well. Now, afterward, if you want to incorporate the esters for your workouts, because you're keto and sometimes keto workouts might be a little bit flatter, you can bring them in later, but just if you're going to do the lifestyle, do that right by yourself first. And then, if you've done it previously and you want to use the esters the second and third time because you know what you're doing, okay, fine. But and there's also this huge placebo effect with the food. This one person got mad at me saying she thought that it was working. I said, well, how do you know that it's not the fact that you paid $5 for that, 2 capfuls, and that makes you less inclined to grab that bag of chips in 10 minutes?
Yeah.
She did not like it. I'm like, we don't know that it, because I see 4 and 5-star ratings on these keto pills that do nothing, raspberry ketones have nothing to do with
anything.
Ketones.
Yeah.
And they had 5,000 reviews. Like, how do you fake that? I mean, somehow, and it's because I think, first of all, many of them have caffeine. So the caffeine is what's doing everything. And the raspberry is just confusing. But, they just bought this $20 pill. You're going to $20 box of pills. You're going to curb your response if you take a placebo. And then, you're deciding, I just paid $20, $40 for this box of pills. You might be less inclined to buy, a bag of Doritos or eat a bag of Doritos. And then these multi-level marketing companies that you talked about before, they talk about, they say it's not supposed to be for weight loss, even though 90% of the people are using it for weight loss. So that's funny. So they'll have their presentations and they say, ketogenic diet plus this. And I say, well, ketogenic diet plus clapping your hands makes you lose weight. So why do you need ketogenic diet and these ketone salts? It's the ketogenic diet, stupid. But then they say that it's not a weight loss supplement. So nowhere on the packaging will say weight loss, even though, again, 90% of people take it, off label for weight loss because they don't want a class action lawsuit because they make claims of weight loss. And I say, could it possibly be that you're losing weight because you got 20 people in your downline that are all looking at you saying, I'll see how you're doing in 30 days and how your weight loss is, and then I'll buy based on your weight. Well, the money is the driving force.
Absolutely.
And money is a great driving force. If you want to do that, great. You probably will lose weight because you've got 20 people, waiting for your results to then sell them on this great effect. And then they got to sell the next people. You're less inclined to grab that snack, that bag of chips, the late night eating, when you know that you've got 30 people that are going to be looking at your scale on Instagram.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I think to your point, what happens is people will clean up their diet. And I think the final point on that is for your body to be in ketosis, for your body to be burning fat for fuel, there's only one way for that to happen is you've got to deplete your glycogen stores and leave the body with no alternative but to go looking for fuel in other places. And after it's done with the carbs and the glycogen, it's going to go for fat. And that's what being in ketosis is. The ketone esters or ketone salts, whatever they are, will then add the performance layer. They'll add the cognitive benefits or whatever the case may be, and maybe augment some of the stuff that's going on at the same time. So you know what? We're now at an hour and a half, but there's one thing we didn't touch on, and I do want to say this. And this is because these are questions people ask. Do I need to be in ketosis to be using ketones successfully? And I think the answer to that is no, but you'll do better if you're at least on a low glycemic diet. So if you're not riding the sugar roller coaster, if you're at least on a nutrition plan that's keeping your blood glucose fairly stable, you're in a really good place to get benefit from the exogenous ketones.
So you'll get benefits both ways, but you'll be able to take less. So you'll be able to take less, and that's more cost effective. But also, anytime you're going to eat less crap, is it, taking the ketone esters is just going to multiply that benefit. So, but if I had, one choice for someone to eat better or take ketone esters, it'd be eat better. Just, stop the glucose. And sometimes I'll say to people, hey, first of all, just stop, do these 3 things with your glucose for 3 days. Once you notice benefit, then come back to me and let's add ketone esters. But ketone esters, I've got 2 groups. The keto people that say, I don't need to use exogenous ketones because I like to make my own. That's the line.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you got these glucose athletes, for example, glucose-based athletes. Well, they're chugging glucose packets. They're not saying, oh, well, I have glycogen, so I don't need to take gel packs. It's the same thing. Exogenous ketones are a compatible fuel source to those keto athletes, giving them now a fuel source where before they were just trying to make enough, but your body can't make enough ketones to sustain that energy. So it's just like a glucose-based athlete chugging glucose packets.
Yeah, it's for the high demand situations. Yeah.
But then the non-keto athletes, or athletes or even just regular people, they're not used to having ketones in their system, but the body still can use it as this alternate fuel source to go alongside the glucose and help fuel that brain energy gap and bring you up, or help you use it to augment your multi-day fasting or intermittent fasting. If you have issues with, I can't intermittent fast because my body's not trained, well, you can bring in the ketone esters, try to skip that morning coffee, or some people do a buttered coffee in the morning. Well, what's better? The point of that is to having high fat in the morning, so you're restricting your carbs. What's better than a lot of fat? No fat. Literally, no fat is better than fat. You got carbs as the worst. Fat would be better than carbs, but then no fat. So if you take a little bit of ester and you have 90% less calories and take you all the way to lunchtime, just like the coffee would, that right there, you're going to save 300 calories every morning. And that's cumulatively beneficial. So it works for both groups. Just how they take it will be a little bit different. And the keto people might take a little bit less. But the funny thing is, on the athletic performance, the keto people can take more. We found that the range is they can start less, but they can actually take a lot more because it doesn't drop their blood glucose. And 2 years scratching my head, how are some athletes able to take a huge bottle and just have blowout bodybuilding, numbers? And then, another athlete, they take a large amount, and then I figured it out that it's the keto athletes can start with less and find benefit, but they actually can go higher because it doesn't drop their blood glucose. But yeah, it works for both groups when it works. It doesn't work for everyone. But yeah, it's both groups that find benefit in it.
Great. All right. Well, this has been amazing. Frank, you warned me. You said, yeah, an hour, sure, no problem. And I'm like, we'll do it in an hour, but we won't. But you know what? I think to the point of our conversation earlier, it's about how much information you're able to pack into this time. So I think this is full of good information. So it was worth going over the hour. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You should mention the code, the coupon code.
I'm going to. So basically, it's KetoneAid.com, just like it sounds, is the website. If you'd like to try the ketone esters for yourself, you can use promo code longevity, and that'll give you free shipping in the US.
Up to $20, and that will include some Canada.
Okay, so you'll offset the shipping in Canada to $20. Right. Amazing. Yeah. So,
but not for the 40. There's a $40 option, which is just a KE1 6-pack. It won't work for that. So it'll work for any of the
larger orders.
KE4 and the larger.
Okay. Great. And so that would be an incentive for you guys. If you want to find Frank, he's got a great Facebook community going on, really active and really engaged. Maybe you want to tell people what your Facebook group is. Yeah.
So if you go to KetoneAid.com, at the top, it says community. And sometimes I'll get a text message saying, hey, this marathon was horrible. I'm like, go post it on the group. And they're like, you want me to post something negative on there? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I want everyone to figure out what worked, what didn't work. So we have a lot of, discussions on there. And we talk about new products like the snake water thing that we're working on. We have people vote on, ingredients and.
I saw that, ingredients, packaging, the name, the whole 9 yards. So, so snake water is the new product. We didn't really get to talk about it, but
another time.
You can hit exactly. We can come back another day and have another talk all about the snake water. So I'm going to thank you again, Frank. This was amazing. It was great to connect with you. I'm loving my ketones in all the different ways. I still have lots more ways to try it out. I didn't even tell you this. I'm starting a brain training program over the next little while. So
there you go.
I'm going to go no ketones first, and then I'm going to add the ketones and see what happens, because it's, measurable metrics. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, we've had people go to the upgraded labs and they've done the brain games, and they've destroyed and had a record using ketone esters. They were the highest performing brain numbers that the lab had ever seen.
Okay, well, hopefully I'm not the person that destroys that somehow. Anyway, thank you. This is like the longest goodbye. We will see you again, and I look forward to hearing so much more about, all the clinical studies that are happening right now.
All right, thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, because that's what helps us to be heard and to be seen. If you'd like to connect with me directly, or if you'd like to leave any comments, or if you have any questions about this episode, please reach out to me directly through my website, natnidham.com. And of course, if you're not already a member of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance community on Facebook, that's where you'll find me every day. It's a short application. Just answer a couple of questions and you're in and interfacing with other amazing biohackers. Thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.